Hi, I'm Megan Mucioki. I'm an assistant research professor at Penn State University. And today I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors from the Karuk tribe, the U.S. Forest Service, and UC Berkeley. Our paper titled Conceptualizing Indigenous Cultural Ecosystem Services and Benefits Under Changing Climatic Conditions in the Klamath River Basin and its Implications for Land Management and Governance. And this paper is currently under review for the Journal of Ethnobiology. So this is just a snapshot today, and then I invite you to go and read it once it's been published there. This research was part of a collaborative tribal university agency research, education, and extension project that spanned the last 7 years, focusing on enhancing tribal health, food security, and agroecosystem resilience with tribes in the Klamath River Basin. And the Klamath River Basin is a region that spans from far north California into southern Oregon in the United States. Over the past decade, California and Oregon have experienced increasing frequency of extreme weather events, including catastrophic wildfires, with the 2020 fire season being the most extensive and destructive in recorded history. Decreased rainfall and snowpack and increased summertime highs, coupled with a legacy of a fire exclusion, has made the Klamath River Basin forests and communities vulnerable to large and destructive wildfires and stress to cultural ecosystems. Today, climate change impacts compounded by cumulative impacts of hydroelectric dams on the main stem of the Klamath River and colonial forest management regimes continue to negatively impact environmental and human health. The paper that I present here today is situated in the conceptual framework of ecosystem services and cultural ecosystem services, and our primary aim is to examine how climate change is both affecting and can be mitigated by Indigenous peoples' conceptualizations and stewardship of their cultural ecosystems. And this is a case study based in the Klamath River Basin, as I mentioned, but the framework that I present today could be transferable to other Indigenous communities around the world. In this study, we've developed a framework of Indigenous Cultural Ecosystem Services, or ICES for short, to organize and understand the unique components of ecosystem services in Indigenous contexts in the Pacific Northwest, and the influence of climate change on ICES and the benefits that are garnered from ICES. The framework is developed from a modified version of Fish et al.'s 2016 Cultural Ecosystem Services Framework. So in the middle of the diagram, you can see Indigenous Cultural Ecosystem Services is a mutual relationship between cultural practices, such as digging Indian potatoes or using fire to manage the landscape, in environmental spaces such as the forest or the river, ceremonial grounds, or other culturally important areas. ICES are both influenced by climate change and also have the ability to mitigate climate change. ICES draw from the biophysical and policy and government's domains and give rise to both tangible and intangible services and benefits to both the environment and people. Cultural values influence all components of the ICES model and have the ability to support ICES in social ecological resilience or diminish both, depending on whose cultural values are prioritized and applied. The data collected in this paper was through 21 focus groups and 200 key informant interviews conducted over the last 4 years. And the phenological and climate observations were collected in 2019 and 2020. The interviews and focus groups were primarily focused on cultural practices related to gathering plants. Our qualitative data was analyzed in vivo using open and flexible coding, and our codes were organized based on component of the ICES model, and this diagram shows our codes and our subcodes. So moving on to the results section, many respondents reported a speeding up of seasons and seasonal harvest. For example, in the middle Klamath River Basin, evergreen huckleberries, Vaccinium ovatum, which were previously harvested in October or September in the 1900s, are now ready for harvest in July. Weather extremes and fluctuations cause uneven ripening of fruits and erratic physiological and reproductive cycles. For example, willow, Salix exugia, and California beaked hazel, Corylus cornata, are observed budding and flowering months ahead of time. And these shrubs are both used to harvest sticks for basketry. So early budding interrupts the rhythm of stick harvesting, creating a shorter window when sticks can be harvested before the buds leaf out too much. Increased incidence, spread, and duration of wildfire due to hot and summer dry conditions cause months of heavy smoke inversion layers. So people are reporting that a good 2 months of the summer, there's very poor air quality for people, plants, and animals. And one respondent has observed Yerba Buena, Clinopodium douglasii, turning purple and dying in August during an intense wildfire seasons. And this is an herb used for tea that usually stays evergreen all year long. And this is something the person, a seasoned gatherer in her late 60s, had never seen before. A general decrease in precipitation has been observed with increasing years of drought and duration of drought, with a lack of rainfall in some years contributing to seasons where some cultural foods do not produce at all. And this is the case for tan oak acorn, which is an important food for home consumption and ceremonial use. That's Notholithocarpus densiflorus. And this respondent is saying, I know last year it had a big impact on us, the lack of acorn harvest. When we're having to say, how many acorns do you have? I only have this many. We're worried about it having enough for dance, let alone I can't make acorns because this is all I have and I got to save it for dance time. Climate change effects on ICES are influenced by how the landscape is governed and by whom over time. Policies today inhibit cultural practices in the mitigation of climate change by Indigenous people in the Klamath River Basin. After contact with Euro-Americans, Indigenous cultural knowledge systems and stewardship practices were outlawed and suppressed as Eurocentric values, governance, and resource management prioritized industrial resource exploitation and fire exclusion. Today, the harvest and management of cultural plants are governed by public policies which do influence how, when, and if cultural practices can take place. Indigenous cultural stewardship practices, such as cultural burning, can mitigate against the risk of increased wildfires due to drought or fire suppression practices, showing the agency of the tribe in our ICES model and the need for more enabling policies to support increased tribal stewardship opportunities. So this respondent in the quote that I put here is talking about exercising tribal sovereignty and going out and managing 2 or 3 acorn trees or a hazel bush using cultural fire. And he says that's not working against nature, that is working with nature. ICES benefits are directly and indirectly influenced by climate change. Degradation of benefits are the consequences of the interplay between misguided land management policies and climate change on biophysical landscapes that affect ICES and associated benefits. Degradation of ICES ultimately influence garnered benefits related to spirituality, food security, health, family, and more. And this is a table of benefits that we found that are related to Indigenous cultural ecosystem services. And I'm not going to get in detail here due to lack of time, but we would invite you to read our paper when it is published for more information on this. So moving on to our conclusions. Climate change in the Klamath River Basin is changing the extent to which Indigenous peoples are able to carry out cultural stewardship practices, changing the time, location, availability, and health of cultural resources, or the ability to utilize them at all. There is resilience in multifaceted familial cultural practices and informal and formal partnerships in relation to adaptive management and climate mitigation. So we're finding that families, they harvest acorns in different ways. They process acorns in different ways, depending on how the knowledge is passed down, and that is inherently resilient. There are partnerships forming between public, private, and tribal agencies to support cultural fire and prescribed fire on the ground to safeguard communities and support the health and productivity of cultural resources. Cultural ecosystem services are in fact tangible and easily identified by those that provide benefit from and depend on those services. So, previously in the literature, the cultural ecosystem services were thought as something that's intangible and hard to quantify, but we're finding that participants in our study could easily identify them and identify the benefits through food security, health, social networks, etc. Gathering is a cultural ecosystem service and not solely provisional. The authors would like to recognize the invaluable contributions of community members from the Karuk, Yurok, and Klamath tribes who participated in our research and cultural practitioners from whom we have learned so much. And I'd love to hear from you today if there's time, or please reach out to me over email with any questions. Thank you.